After a major Supreme Court loss on tariffs, former President Trump didn't just get mad, he got even. In a pretty remarkable speech, he basically flipped a legal defeat into what he framed as a political victory, and then launched a sweeping new policy. So how on earth did he pull that off? Let's break down the strategy he used. He kicked things off with this bombshell. Right away, you can tell he wasn't just disagreeing with a court ruling. No, he was framing it as a betrayal of the country, and that really set the stage for a pretty dramatic showdown.
So here's how we're going to walk through this speech. We'll start with his initial disappointment and his attack on the court. Then we'll get into the very clever way he found a silver lining. After that, we hit the big policy change he announced, and finally his grand vision for why tariffs are so powerful.
All right, so first up, his immediate reaction. And what's interesting is, before he even attacked the decision itself, he made a point to very carefully separate the justices he approved of from the ones he, well, didn't.
Yeah, he specifically named them, Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh, and congratulated them for their dissenting opinions. By praising them as patriots, he was drawing a really clear line in the sand. The message was, you were either with him and for the country, or you were against him.
So after praising his allies, he turned his fire on the rest of the court. And wow, the language he used was, well, it was incredibly strong. You can see his attack wasn't really about legal reasoning. Not at all. He went straight after their motives and their patriotism. He called them unpatriotic, suggested they were swayed by foreign interests, and said they were weak in the face of political pressure from what he described as obnoxious, ignorant, and loud people.
And with this image of foreign countries dancing in the streets, he completely reframed the whole issue. All of a sudden, this wasn't just a domestic legal ruling, it was a huge win for America's rivals. And that last line, they won't be dancing for long, that was a very clear warning of what was coming next.
Okay, now we get to what might be the most clever part of the whole speech. How do you turn a legal defeat into a strategic win? Well, Trump's answer was to just completely change the meaning of what the court had actually said. He starts by just dismissing the court's logic as ridiculous, and then he builds this really fascinating, almost counterintuitive argument. He basically says that by taking away one small, specific tool, the court had accidentally left him with much bigger, more powerful weapons.
And right here, this is the core of his paradoxical argument. He claimed the court told him he couldn't charge a tiny $1 fee, but that the very same ruling left him with the power to do much more drastic things, like cutting off all trade or imposing a country-destroying embargo. He summed it up perfectly himself, saying, "I can destroy their entire economy, but I can't charge them a small fee. How crazy is that?"
Now, to back this up, he leaned really heavily on the dissenting opinion from Justice Kavanaugh. He actually quoted Kavanaugh directly, using the justice's own words to argue that this specific ruling was narrow and didn't really limit a president's broader tariff powers that are found in other laws.
And these are the specific laws he pointed to. These are powerful trade acts from the 60s and 70s. These statutes give a president a ton of authority to act on trade for things like national security or to fight unfair practices. So his argument was, hey, the court's narrow ruling on one law actually strengthened my hand to use these other, much more powerful ones.
So this whole reinterpretation, it wasn't just him talking. It wasn't just a rhetorical exercise. No, it was all a setup for the climax of his speech, a major policy announcement. And with those words, he pivoted from argument to action. His response to the court wasn't going to be some legal appeal or a future plan. No, this was happening right now.
And the number at the heart of it all was this: 10%, a new across-the-board tariff on goods coming into the United States.
To be specific, he announced he was signing an order for a 10% global tariff, and he used the authority from Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which you'll notice is one of the very statutes he had just cited. This was a direct application of his argument. The court blocked one path, so he immediately took another one.
But he didn't even stop there. He also launched new investigations under Section 301, which was basically signaling that this 10% global tariff was just the beginning, and that more targeted actions against what he called unfair trading practices could be coming down the line.
And finally, he zoomed out to make his grand case for tariffs, connecting them directly to what he sees as his biggest accomplishments.
He credited his past use of tariffs with a whole range of successes. He claimed they were responsible for stock market records, for helping settle international conflicts, and even for reducing the flow of fentanyl into the country. So for him, tariffs are not just an economic tool, they are a tool of national power and security.
So, The ultimate takeaway from his perspective is this. Despite losing the case, he argued the court's decision actually clarified and strengthened his hand. By forcing him to use what he claims are more powerful and established statutes, the court inadvertently made his authority on trade, in his own words, more powerful and more crystal clear.
Which leaves us with a huge question, right? Did we just witness a legal defeat get masterfully flipped into a political victory? And what does this whole moment reveal about the real boundaries of presidential power? That's the debate this speech has really reignited.